Look, I'm very, very annoyed with Odegaard. There is no final one. This is the final straw for Odegaard. That's the final thing.
What Aston Villa identified is, well, if you've got McGinn in these areas, you've got Tielemans, you've also, most importantly, got fullbacks who are willing to stretch the pitch. What essentially happens is you've got Rice having to, defend McGinn, defend Tielemans.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Pythagoras in Boots football podcast. We're reviewing Aston Villa 2, Arsenal 1. Emery's men have put the cat amongst the pigeons in the title race and could be title contenders themselves. I've got with me a rather sad looking Omid and I've got a rather chipper looking Samson. How are we, boys? You all right?
I'm feeling grey than my hoodie, but I'm sure you two are feeling it slightly better.
Well, I can't wait to get stuck in with this one. So Samson, let's jump straight into it with the dashboard.
I think if we can just look at the momentum in the game, I think this game's really summed up by Arsenal having, peaks in the game, moments where they put a lot of pressure on Aston Villa. We saw that at half time after the substitutions. But overall, Aston Villa did a great job staying in the game. And if you see the end of the game, and this is why, some people are saying about the XG being a bit weird, but Aston Villa ended the game as the stronger team. That's why they created more chances towards the end of the game. That's why their XGs ended up much higher than Arsenal.
Omid, you basically said it's a Fugazi XG. So can you explain to me why did you come up with that statement?
Look, I don't think, first of all, Villa necessarily deserved to lose the game. I think a draw would have probably been the fair result, but they nicked it. But, 0.9 or so of that XG came from the 4 shots that led to the final goal. But in the end, I think they deserved it. They made the bolder subs, I think. They were up for it from the get-go. And to be honest, I don't think Arteta's learned from some of his selection errors. We saw towards the end of the previous game, Marina was flat out on his feet. The only player I wasn't necessarily happy with was Rice. I think it was 21 defensive contributions. The next most in the game was 13 and 10. We saw how he robbed Onana for the Arsenal equaliser. That block on Matty Cash's shot. In these sort of games, you need to be a bit bolder, I think. You need to drop Rice into the number 6, have him cover that defence. Because at the moment, if you're making that many defensive contributions, but you're an 8, the amount of distance he has to cover back to make that. I know those defensive contributions doesn't mean that they happen in his own third only, but many of them do.
So just continuing on Arsenal's selection, we've just got a sort of focus areas of attack. And you can see Arsenal, lots of focus down the right-hand side, barely anything on the left-hand side. And this was a result of the selection they went with today. I don't know what you guys think, Omid. You talking earlier before we started about the selection, you being unhappy about it. Tell us more about that.
Well, it was the 6th back 4 lineup that we've had in 15 games in the Prem. And on top of that, we had a brand new front 3, and that front 3 is probably the least penetrative one in behind I can think of. Definitely Marino, centre forward, is less penetrative than Havertz, is obviously not available, and Gyökeres. Eze left wing, I'd rather have Trossard and Martinelli being the most penetrative. And obviously, Saka is the most penetrative out of that front 3. But as a front 3, it's just not penetrative. We know that, Tyrone Mings missing. Martinez can be a bit sloppy in the air sometimes. He punched it down once or twice, but we didn't even test them at all. So I just wasn't happy with it. And also, I did mention last week, I believe, Nketiah. I know Eze shouldn't be playing left wing, but if you are to play him left wing, then you need somebody like Nketiah.
I disagree with you, Omid. I disagree with you on this.
You'd rather have Calafiori, who didn't overlap once.
Calafiori's been one of your best overlapping fullbacks, right?
Well, he didn't overlap today.
He didn't overlap today, but I think you don't really have an overlapping left back. For me, a true overlapping fullback is like your Nuno Mendes's, your Roberto Carlos's, your Alphonso Davies, Balde. These are proper, I call overlapping fullbacks. I think Calafiori forces it and he does a great job, bearing in mind that he's probably played centre-back a lot in his career as well. I don't think Nketiah for me is a wide centre-back. He's not a true, naturally overlapping fullback. And I find it really surprising that Arsenal fans were calling him the final piece of the puzzle in terms of this overlapping fullback that's going to give you genuine width. I think he's one of those guys. If he's got space in front of him, he'll be able to kick the ball into that space. But if he's up against a low block and you're expecting him to show that footwork and be the winger on that left side, I don't think he's going to be able to do it. I just don't think Eze can play as a left winger based on the fullback profiles that you've got in the squad. I just don't see it happening.
If you've got a player like Nkapie, that last game against Chelsea when he got 0 aerial duel percentage, losing all 6, and today he wins 100% of them, but he also gets dribbled past the most. That's just too much of a, it's just too up and down, and you cannot have that at centre-back.
I'll agree with you in that one. Like, maybe Samson agrees as well in that, because Calafiori is a more experienced centre-back profile, and to me, he strikes me a bit more of a leader. Like, obviously, just watching him for the Italian team, he had that aura of a player that he was the main player of the defence. So for me, in an inexperienced backline where there is a lot of changes, I agree with that. I think Calafiori probably should have been the centre-back for this, and Hincapie left-back. The only thing I slightly disagree with is in terms of the tactical, improvement of providing width for an Eze. I think there's marginal upgrade, possibly marginal, but I just think Arsenal fans are overstating how much.
I do want to back Eze a little bit as well, real quick, because I remember when Declan first came in, he took on a lot, and he was like, because Arteta's very demanding, and Eze's clearly been up for it for the majority of the part. He's willing to learn. This is a slight setback. He saw his face as soon as Cash was on his blind side. He knew, and then obviously has to go through Ray's legs. So I do think he will come back better from this. But ever since that Tottenham game, I think that peaked a little bit. You've got to take him back a few notches now, because against Chelsea, he was anonymous. And today again, I just think he's a bit tired. Odegaard's come back at the right time. In that regard, I don't think they should be playing together, though.
All right, lads, enough number crunching. Onto the tactical board, where Samson's going to run through both the teams in terms of their shape, where the game was won and lost from a chess perspective.
Yeah, so this was an interesting game from Arsenal's perspective, because you had both the presence of Eze and Odegaard in the lineup. You had Calafiori at left back, who was going to bomb forward in some interesting ways, and we'll get onto that. And you had Ben White and Saka, who had quite a good connection on the right-hand side. So if we just jump straight into Arsenal's attacking shape, it's kind of a dichotomy here. You've got the right-hand side, the left-hand side, and I've highlighted the sort of the key players involved in these points. So the left-hand side, we saw a lot of this where Calafiori would bomb forward, Eze would be playing out wide. Now, this kind of plays into Villa's hands, because if we just go back to the original lineup, Villa are playing, McGinn here, Rodgers here, Tielemans as well. It's a very narrow setup. So you're almost playing into their hands when you've got a left back playing on the attacking line. You've got, a player who should really be playing in these zones, playing out wide. It kind of just benefits Villa in a way. Now, look at the right-hand side as the difference. Like Saka, Ben White. Ben White was overlapping, making runs here. Odegaard would come here as well. Saka would make runs in behind. There was a lot more joy for Arsenal. We saw that in the concentration of play graphic, where Arsenal had a lot of their attacks coming down that right-hand side. That's where they were getting most of their joy. And Maatsen had a really important role in trying to stop that.
Samson, if I can interrupt, right? So from an Aston Villa perspective, well, were they defending more down the right side or the left side? Where was their team shape? Which side of the pitch were they having to occupy? And I guess from a Arteta perspective, he'll probably argue, well, I wanted one of my flanks to be really cohesive, very penetrative, and I wasn't that worried about the other flank. What would be your counter argument to that statement?
Well, if we look at the average shapes, and I'm just going to bring players across here, Aston Villa left, a lot of space on this left-hand side. They were more sort of flooded over to this right-hand side. And so I think, at least for the first half, because of the way Arsenal was setting up, because, ultimately leaving Eze in these types of positions is very different to leaving Saka, for example, in these types of positions. And so I think it meant that, Matty Cash could play quite inverted. McGinn, again, didn't really have to get stretched out wide.
And moving on to Aston Villa's build-up phase, what can you tell us about that and why that was so important in leading to the victory?
So, as sort of mentioned before, Aston Villa, they favour this sort of narrow setup. And I thought it was really interesting in how they sort of broke the lines against Arsenal. So Arsenal, we know it's a 4-4-2 setup. When they press as a unit, they sort of collapse in on the ball carrier. And what Aston Villa identified is, well, if you've got McGinn in these areas, you've got Tielemans, you've also, and most importantly, got fullbacks who are willing to stretch the pitch. What essentially happens is you've got Rice having to, defend McGinn, defend Tielemans. You've got Zubamendi doing the same thing. So what it means is essentially Kamara can, plug those passes in there. Onana the same. Now, it was quite interesting because whenever Rice actually went out to Onana to put pressure on him, that actually worked for Arsenal. We saw them turn the ball over a lot. And it's interesting because then, when that was happening at the beginning of the game, Aston Villa then made an adjustment. So this is one example. Kamara, he's sort of dropping deep to receive the ball. Let's say Torres has got the ball here. Odegaard's putting the pressure on him. Then they bring the extra midfielder next to Kamara, and you can create these third-man passes to get Tielemans in these sort of danger zones. Now, when Tielemans receives the ball here, you've got runners like Watkins. You've also got Rodgers, who's great in transition. You've got Matty Cash, who might be flying forward. Same with Maatsen. So the sort of different angles, the different solutions that Villa were trying to find to get through this Arsenal team was very fluid. It was very adaptive. And I think this is why they won the game at the end of the day. And I saw this a lot online. Like, Arsenal didn't really set up to play the game in a way where they were attacking the spaces. Villa did.
Was there a change from Arsenal then going into the second half? Because obviously it led to the equaliser, and it was a well-worked goal, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was a fantastic goal. And this is why I think, Saka overall, there's a reason why the Villa fans are booing him. It's because he's one of the best players on the pitch. And, as I mentioned before, this right-hand side was, a source of joy for Arsenal. And when you bring Trossard on, there was two things I noticed. Firstly, Calafiori wasn't bombing on into these areas anymore. So Trossard now has a bit more room to work. This narrow setup just means he's got a bit more space. And most importantly, actually, is that it's not just space to receive the ball, but also if you've got separation from, let's say, your right back, and we saw this in the goal, Trossard then has the ability to ghost in. If you're really tight to your player like this, it's much harder to make runs off them. And I think that ability to ghost into the box and create those chances for yourself is so important. I think Gyökeres, he didn't really do much on the ball. I think later in the game, there were a few runs he didn't really make. But at least at the start of the second half, bringing him on kind of forced the Aston Villa backline back a little bit. And it created a little bit more space for Odegaard to work in this area, for example. And it created space for Trossard. And I think, I just want to mention again, it was so important that, and I think this is important going forward for Arsenal. We've talked about how they do not have these overlapping fullback profiles. So they need to work with what they have. And what they have are these fullbacks that can sit in these spaces. They can help with the build-up. We know how good Calafiori is driving with the ball forward. And then on occasion, as a surprise tactic, yes, he can bomb forward and, put that cross in. Like we saw, I can't remember which game it was, but he put a cross in for Madueke. And, it was, it's moments like that can help Arsenal. Not having this guy sort of bombing forward all the time, being the most attacking threat for them.
Yeah. So just obviously, it looked at that stage that Arsenal had come back early into the game and into the second half, and that they were probably headed for a win. But Aston Villa managed to recapture and reclaim the narrative. So what did they do to go on and win the game?
And this is where Emre deserves a lot of credit, because I just want to point out, you've got so Marlon's come on for Watkins, even though Watkins was making good runs off the ball, he was quite wasteful with his chances. So they brought Marlon on. He was able to make it stick a lot more. But if you just look at this front four, you've got Rodgers, you've got Buendia, you've got Sancho, you've got Tielemans now, who was playing in this 10 role, dropping a bit deeper. Just compare that to what they had before. They've taken off a lot of defensive players and they've thrown on a lot of attacking players. You've also got Maatsen still on the pitch. That's important because we've said this before. Sancho, to get the best out of Jadon Sancho, you need to give him that overlap. And it's not necessarily someone just flying around the back of him, but also this sort of underlapping run. We saw a chance, I think it was nearly an own goal, where Sancho's picked up the ball, he sucked in the players, and Maatsen's made this lovely run. He's put the ball in, and it's nearly led to a goal. And then when Villa did get the sort of winning goal, it came from down this right hand side. Rodgers showing his adaptability in this game. We mentioned how sort of impactful he was in this game, receiving the ball on this right hand side. You've got Buendia going forward. You've got Marlon going forward. I mean, it's the most chaotic goal I've seen in a while.
Yeah, it was a deserved goal.
Exactly.
Even though it felt chaotic, it felt like they were absolutely just knocking on the door, and they eventually, it's like that wolf against the pig's houses. He just blew it down. And I think what's interesting for me is I think Buendia, brilliant preseason, and we spotted that preseason. We thought Buendia's going to have a good season this year, and for the first time, he looks really comfortable in a Villa shirt. And it's not necessarily in a starter role, but it just feels like whenever he comes on, there's like a purpose to him on the pitch. And, I'm really happy to see that because we've always thought he's a talented boy. And I think Sancho's impact in this game, quite underrated because it's very nuanced in terms of his impact. But what I believe he managed to do was that because he was so clever in terms of his usage of the ball and wriggly in these little tight spaces, whenever Arsenal were trying to sort of press and counter press and get that ball to go on and win the game, he would just wriggle it out, and then suddenly Arsenal were then having to push back, and then Aston Villa then established territory, I feel like, for the final 15 minutes of the game. So I think just on Odegaard, obviously Martin Keown attracted a bit of criticism for giving him the man of the match. Did you think he played well? Did he deserve the man of the match? Was Morgan Rogers better?
Odegaard is probably the last person I'm going to criticize, because he's created a lot of chances. He forced that great save from Martinez with that long shot. I think, as I said before, the right-hand side was not an issue for Arsenal.
Odegaard's just got this too much influence on one player. We've moved on from that. We should have moved on from that. Now he's dropping deep. He's impacting the 6 area, but he's also not impacting the threat like Eze was against Tottenham, for example. So for me, if I had to choose one to start in general as a default starter, it would be Eze centrally. And just a final one, again, like... look, I'm very, very annoyed with Odegaard. There is no final one. This is the final straw for Odegaard. That's the final thing.
I just have to say quickly the fact that Odegaard is having to supplement all these different areas because Arsenal are having a bit of struggle. And I don't want to go overboard here because they're still first. They've had a good season, but I just don't see how he's the problem. Like I think the way I see this game, I think it doesn't get mentioned enough. How have you ended up with a situation where you've got Eze playing left wing, and they were making it out like it was some big tactical innovation on the commentary that Calafiori was bombing forward. Oh, he's the furthest player forward. I was losing my mind. I was like, why are you playing a centre half whose best asset is receiving the ball in deeper areas and driving forward with it? Why is he playing on the defensive line like he's off the shoulder striker?
So in conclusion, Omid, can Aston Villa sustain this title charge?
Well, if you look at it in terms of that, Harvey Elliott's hardly had a look in. Watkins has been on poor form. Bundy is only just getting into it. Guessant hasn't really settled. Donny Marlin's starting to fire. They still have room for growth. But on the other side, I look at that defence and there isn't really much depth there at all. I mean, if the 2 centre-backs were to get injured, you would have to get Lindelof back, and Tyrone Mings is currently out and he's 32. And can you trust him to really lead a title charge? Plus, they got Europe. I'm really impressed with how they've bounced back from the final day of last season, where they basically did get robbed of a Champions League spot due to refereeing decisions, and Newcastle pipped them. I think they've got a good depth in midfield. But as the expectations increase, and we're not even halfway through the stage of the season yet, I'll be highly, highly surprised.
And just from an Arsenal perspective, Samson, is this a minor blip in the road or a more concerning result in the long term?
I think if Arteta persists with this lineup of playing Eze on the left and playing a centre-back to overlap, I think it is going to be a problem long term. I think the Premier League, the way it is this season, games against Everton away, that's going to be a problem for you if you have a flawed setup. So I think Arteta really has to do some thinking now. How is he going to fit Odegaard and Eze into the same team? They don't really have left backs to pull out that are overlapping. So that is going to sort of force his hand. So it's whether he can make that tough choice of, do I drop Odegaard indefinitely or do I swap out Eze for a couple of games?
Okay, that's enough from us, guys. Let us know in the comments what you thought about this performance from an Aston Villa perspective, as well as Arsenal. Remember, you can find us on Spotify and all audio platforms, not just YouTube. And we see you guys again next time. Bye.